1. What does Melchizedek's name mean? What does his name mean? Question number 2. Which tribe did Jesus come from? And why is that important? Question number 3. In what sense did Levi pay the tithe to Melchizedek? In what sense did Levi pay the tithe to Melchizedek? And question number 5, how many sacrifices did Jesus offer?
About 4.
Oh, thank you. Question number 4. I'd already read 4 to myself.
And the answer will do. If it's right Jesus down, you're in.
Question number 4 would be, why quote the Psalms? Why is it significant that the Hebrew writer quotes the Psalms about Melchizedek? Why is it significant that the Hebrew author quotes the Psalms and the psalmist and talking about Melchizedek? And then that last question again that I already gave you. How many sacrifices did Jesus offer? Question number 5. Need any of them repeated? All right, question number 1. What does Melchizedek's name mean? Not everybody at once, please. Calm down.
I'm waiting, guys. I'm not speaking.
Okay. I can see why you get that answer, and that's why I asked this question. He gives both the meaning of the name of where he was the king, as well as what his name means. And he is the king of Salem, which was the old name for Jerusalem, which would be the king of peace. So he was the king of peace. But that's not what his name means. What does his name mean? King of justice, or probably a better translation is king of righteousness. King of righteousness, but you're exactly right. Some translation, in fact, the NLT will say king of justice, but probably a better translation is king of righteousness. Very good, very good. Question number 2, which tribe did Jesus come from, and why is that significant? Jesus was born into the tribe of Judah. He comes from the tribe of Judah, and why is that significant?
Because it's not where the priests come from.
Yeah, where did the priests come from?
Levi.
Tribe of Levi. So he's not where the Levitical priests come from. He's not where the priests in the Old Covenant come from. And so that's the significance of him being after the order or in the likeness of Melchizedek. So it's a different priestly line. Question number 3. In what sense did Levi pay the tithe to Melchizedek?
Because he hadn't been born yet. He was still in the loins of Abraham.
That's exactly right. When Abraham paid the tithe to Melchizedek, since he was going to be born and he was going to be a descendant of Abraham, everybody who comes after Abraham, therefore, is considered paying the tithe to Melchizedek, which the implication of that is you pay the tithe to the greater one blesses the lesser one. And so he's just trying to show the superiority of Melchizedek, and therefore Jesus, to the whole Old Covenant system, and the Old Covenant system being tied with the Levitical priesthood. Why quote the psalmist when talking about Melchizedek. What's the significance of that?
Darrell said he liked poetry.
Say it again.
Darrell said he liked poetry.
Okay, we made this point once before, and this is just an inference. I don't want to come down on this too hard, but I do think it's significant because some of the teaching that we're aware of that the rabbis were using, and some of the Jews or in the first century thought that the Levitical priesthood was superior to Melchizedek because they had the Old Testament, they studied the Old Testament, and they knew this Melchizedek was a priest. But their teaching through Old Testament times and up through the first century was the Levitical priesthood is superior. Why? Because it came later. You know, you had Melchizedek, and here later on, God establishes the tribe of Levi and the descendants of Aaron in particular to be the high priest. So you had to be from the tribe of Levi, and so it's a Levitical priesthood, and so that comes later, and so, hey, that's the one God established. And the Hebrew author is in a roundabout way addressing that by saying it's not just in the book of Genesis, the book of Psalms, which is much later than when the law was originally given, still says there's supremacy and there's uniqueness to Melchizedek. So he's using the old, I love this because he uses the Old Testament scripture itself to deal with people who are basing their argument on the Old Testament. He says if it comes later, it's supposed to be greater, then he in a roundabout way says, well, how about this? This is in the Psalms. This is 400 years later than when the law was originally given. Okay, and the last question, how many sacrifices did Jesus offer? And I don't mean that to be a trick question. I mean that to get to the point the Hebrew author is trying to make. One. There's a sense in which all sacrifices are pointing to this one sacrifice that Jesus offered once for all in himself. Okay? And I don't want to take it any further than what the Hebrew author is dealing with here. He's dealing with Jesus acting as not only as acting as high priest, but also being the sacrifice that the high priest offers as well.
Could you also say that Jesus only had one sacrifice because he was perfect?
Yes.
And you had the sacrifice because of sin. If you've sinned, you had the sacrifice.
Yes.
Jesus never sinned.
Jesus never sinned. So his sacrifice would not be for himself. It'd be for everybody else. And it was the perfect sacrifice. And the argument we're going to get into tonight, I hope, if we get far enough, in chapter 9, he is really going to belabor this point that he only had to do it once. I just find it so interesting. I mean, anything the Bible says, I know if God said it, it's important. But I just find it really interesting when there are some points that verse after verse, it just kind of keeps piling up to make a really strong point about it. He only had to do it once. I'm thinking, well, hey, that must be important to God that we get this, that he only did it once. And so when we get there, I want us to talk about some of the ramifications of that, some of the implications of that. Not just that we understand the point that it makes, but what difference does that point make? You understand what I'm saying? So remind me of that when we get there. Okay, chapter 8. Chapter 8, I believe we made it down through like verses 6 or 7, is that right? I'm counting on you guys because I did a poor job of marking my notes as to where we stopped.
I didn't think we got into chapter 8.
We just
Well, we
started
didn't either.
chapter 8.
Hey,
We did-
maybe that's why I don't find a mark on here. Okay, here we go. Let's start at the beginning of chapter 8.
Yeah, that's what you want.
Okay, Hebrews chapter 8, beginning of verse 1. Here is the main point. We have a high priest who sat down in the place of honor besides the throne of the majestic God in heaven. The main point, the idea here is this is not just a summary statement. This is the key idea. So he's not just saying to summarize or therefore, but don't miss this. And this is what's all pointing to. In fact, one of the things I was doing just the other day, just kind of for fun when I was reviewing the book of Hebrews, is I just made a list on a scrap sheet of paper of everything you had under the Levitical priesthood and the implications of that versus what you've got with Christ being after the order of Melchizedek. And, just right off the bat, there are several things that come to mind, but when you start reading the book of Hebrews, he's going to make the point that there are several priests, remember? Because the priests only last as long as they last, right? And then they kept handing it off. And we talked about the fact that it's hard to put a number on that because the priesthood really got goofed up in Jesus' day instead of it being a lifelong office, right? So you've got many priests over here. You got one eternal priest over here. These priests had to offer sacrifices for their own sin because they sinned. He never had to do that because he was sinless. And point after point, it just makes the comparison of the superiority of what we've got with Jesus. And this verse is trying to drill that home to us. He is the high priest that all the other ones were just kind of a shadow of or look forward to. Who sat down? What's the significance of sitting down? Okay, thank you for saying that because that's very true. When a teacher sat down, it meant there was something very significant, very important they had to say. Now, having said that, that's probably not what this verse means because he's not teaching. So I'm glad you pointed that out because that is one of the things that I want us to think about when you read the Bible, because when Jesus went up on the mountain and he sat down and began to teach, that was like, whoa, this is really important. We need to pay attention to it. But the Hebrew author's already told us in the first chapter, and he's mentioning it here, and he's going to mention it again. The significance of sitting down in this case is job's done. Nothing else to do. Complete. Again, another way of getting to this idea once for all, it's taken care of. So we have a high priest who sat down in the place of honor. Does your translation say?
Right hand.
Right hand, very good. That would be the place of honor. The New Living is just translating that for us or interpreting it for us. But that's the place of honor next to the majestic presence, next to God himself. Okay, he's hinting at something here. He's going to come back and address even more so. The blood of the sacrifices, especially on the Day of Atonement. And why? I mean, there's this whole big sacrificial system, but he's really going to focus in on the Day of Atonement. Because the Day of Atonement is where the blood was literally brought into the Holy of Holies, which represented the presence of God. And this only happened on one day of the year, but this is the idea of addressing the sins of God's people and making atonement for it, making them right with God. And the point he's going to make is there's a sense in which, yeah, it did, but a deeper sense in which, no, it didn't. In and of itself, this really didn't take care of the promised sin. But he's really going to focus on that one day because that, by the way, in the Old Testament, do you realize this? The only day that God commanded his people to fast, it was that day. That was the only day. Now, did the Old Testament folks, and even in Jesus' day, did they observe other days of fasting? Yeah, you know, the one that tickles me so much is after the exile, Babylonian exile, when they come back from the exile, one of the things they ask the prophets is they say, hey, do we still have to keep observing all these fasts, the fast of the day when the temple was destroyed and the fast of some of these other significant events and stuff? And you remember what the prophet's answer was from God? God's answer was, I never told you to do those fasts. Yeah. You guys made them up. You know, why are you asking me if you have to? And it just makes me wonder how much of our religion, quote unquote, is stuff that, you know, God's looking at us like, I don't know why you do that. You know, and if by the way, this whole subject of fasting, if you want to fast, that Jesus assumes we are going to fast. There's appropriate times to fast. Fasting is a good thing, but there was only one day that God commanded it, and it was that day. Well, I again think there's good reason for this. God's drawing attention to this day. Extremely significant. This is the day that the sin issue is addressed, right? That's the day that the Hebrew author is going to pick up on and say, don't you get it? As significant as that day was, it was incomplete and it really didn't work. But that day really, maybe better than any other, illustrates what Jesus really did. So once for all, taking care of the problem of sin, the whole idea of atonement. Verse 2, there he ministers in the heavenly tabernacle, the true place of worship that was built by the Lord and not by human hands. Okay, this is the point I wanted to get to, is this whole idea, this picturing presented to us in the tabernacle. It's going to help us better understand. I hesitate to use the word picture because I'm a very visual person, and I like that. I like to picture things in my mind. But one of the things I've got to remember is that God is spirit. John chapter 4, God is spirit. Those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. And it's not like there is this, you know, when we get to heaven, we're going to see this physical tabernacle built. But it's a it is a physical representation of a spiritual reality. And so it's patterned after something that's in heaven. So we're going to learn through this visual picture of what's really true. And what's really true is coming into the very presence of God. And that's exactly where Jesus' blood was offered, because that's where the problem of sin exists. It exists in God. I hope to explain that in much better detail in just a little bit. So that's the true place of worship. Verse 3, and since, by the way, in the NIV, could you read that first part of that verse 3 for me? Somebody have the NIV? Are you using the NIV tonight? Nobody's using the NIV?
Every high
Well,
priest is appointed.
okay, what does the NIV say?
Every high priest is
Okay.
appointed to offer both gifts and sacrifices.
Okay, for some reason I just assumed a lot of people were using it. Can you guys tell me what translations you're using? How many people are using New American Standard? That's a very good translation, very accurate. It just doesn't read quite as well in the English, in my opinion. How many are using NIV? Okay, a couple NIVers. New Living. Okay, a few of y'all. You probably are, because I'm using that, right? What else? If you haven't raised your hand yet, what are you using?
James.
New King James, right?
Yes.
No, I'm glad. Good. Because the old King James was really hard. By the way, I don't mean to sound disparaging, and I don't mean to be critical. The old King James was an excellent translation for the manuscripts they had available in the day. The original King James, we usually refer to it as 1611, which, by the way, I don't know anybody. I really seriously don't know anybody who uses the 1611. Even people who talk about the 1611 King James, they're really using one printed in the 1700s. And a lot of people don't know that. But the 1611, when they had that, there were only 3 manuscripts available. There's a guy named Desiderius Erasmus who was like the Greek scholar of the day, and he's the guy who put together the Greek text that they used. It was based on 3 manuscripts. You know what we've got today? In excess of, what does it say? 6,000 or 7,000?
Just Greek or the others?
Well, I don't know. Give me.
Yeah, 25,000 if you count the others.
Oh, well, hey. Okay. Well, I think 25,000, so a little bit better than, I was thinking, the New Testament's around 7,000, though, Greek manuscripts, right?
Greek, yeah.
7,000 Greek manuscripts. He had 3. Well, and this is what's so amazing. This is what's so amazing. When you put the King James down next to other translations, and you read them side by side, even though some of the English is archaic, right? We're not used to reading that kind of English. Content-wise, wow, there are extremely few places, and every once in a while we'll point it out, where there's manuscript evidence that gives us a better translation. But to me, that's just overwhelming, because still, even with the King James and like the New American Standard, for example, you put those side by side, and 99.89, I mean, the areas where there are differences are very small, which just is amazing to me, because it just testifies, it's a testimony to how compatible, how all the manuscripts agree so well with each other. Anyway, why did I go into all that? Because the problem's usually not in the manuscripts. The problem's usually not in the manuscripts. The problem sometimes is in the translators. And for the NIV, for some reason, decided to leave a word out. And every time this happens, I'm going to try to remember to say this. And what's the word they leave out? They leave out the word for. Okay, what difference does that make? Well, the word, it's an interesting word in the Greek language, because this is a word that connects thoughts. So the point he made in verses 1 and 2, in the original language, he goes from verses 1 and 2 and says for, and then he says what he's going to say here in verse 3, which kind of connects it. And sometimes the connection is lost when you leave out a word like that. So I just want you to know some things like that. I'll bet you the New King James has for in it, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
Good stuff. Okay. Mine says and since, or for. The idea is connecting the thought with what he just said. He says, since every high priest is required to offer gifts and sacrifices, our high priest must make an offering too. if he were here on earth, he would not even be a priest, since there already are priests who are offering up gifts required by the law. They serve in a system of worship that is only a copy, a shadow of the real one in heaven. For when Moses was getting ready to build the tabernacle, God gave him this warning: be sure that you make everything according to the pattern that I have shown you here on the mountain. So when he's up on Mount Sinai, when you're reading about this in the Old Testament, he doesn't just go up there to get the 10 Commandments. That's usually what we focus on. He gets a lot of different directions and a lot of different commandments from God. In fact, those who have counted them come up with approximately 613. That's the number that we usually associate with the laws in the Old Testament. But he's also given directions on exactly how to build the tabernacle. And the point that the Hebrew author is making here is he had to do that because this is supposed to represent realities in heaven. Okay, now this is where I want to insert my little reminder to myself. Not physical realities. This is trying to teach us something about the nature of God. Because that's what we're talking about here. Verse 6, now Jesus, our high priest, has given a ministry that is far superior to the old priesthood, for he is the one who mediates for us a far better covenant with God based on better promises. This term for mediation here is a legal term, and it simply means a go-between. That's usually what we think of mediation. Somebody who, and which, by the way, is one of the major functions of a priest. He's a go-between God and man, right? Especially the role of high priest. And it's based on better promises. What are the better promises? What's he talking about here? What's the better promise?
Forgiveness of sins, always going forward.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. We have real forgiveness, so we are made right with God. Verse 7, for if the first covenant had been faultless, then there would have been no need for a second covenant to replace it. But, you get the implication here, you read this backwards, since the first covenant didn't work, since it couldn't really forgive sins, we were looking forward to something. That's where he's going to quote. Even from the Old Testament, even under the Old Covenant, they knew back under the Old Covenant, we need something better than this, right? So verse 8, but when God found fault with the people, he said, and this is where we're quoting from Jeremiah chapter 31. This is a classic passage in Jeremiah chapter 31. Jeremiah chapter 31, and I think it starts in verse 31, right? Okay, great. I don't have that looked up right now, but it's Jeremiah 31 and following. And here's the quotation. Now remember, this is Jeremiah, right? In Jeremiah, his ministry leads up to the destruction of the temple. The destruction of the temple, you usually associate with what year? 587? Is that the year that... so about 600 years before the time of Christ, right? The Battle of Carchemish is 605. That was a significant battle where the Babylonians became the world power, and that's what Jeremiah is dealing with. He's dealing with the Babylonian threat, and it's not just a threat, it's a promise. You guys don't get your act right, God's going to use Babylon to carry you away into captivity. So, in the midst of the prophet Jeremiah, who we usually refer to as what? What do we call him, the weeping prophet?
He cries.
He was frustrated and felt like he just couldn't make any headway.
Frustrated, couldn't make any headway. Boy, it's a great way to summarize it, because how are you going to feel when you know the truth and you're telling people the truth, and the truth means if you don't change, you are going to be punished, and they're not changing, and you love these people. Boy, I can't help but to think about everybody here can probably relate to that on some level, because you know somebody that you really care about.
Most of the world.
Oh my. But especially the people like you're related to, or somebody that's a close friend to you, and you think to yourself, you know what, if you don't get over your stubbornness or your indifference or whatever, maybe you're not doing it on purpose, but if you don't change, you're going to be lost. Well, of course Jeremiah is the weeping prophet, because people would not respond to God's message. So several times throughout the ministry of Jeremiah, he's not just talking about, listen, God can save you from the Babylonians. But he also says, you're a stubborn people and you're going to be punished, but you know what? God's got a plan for the people who do respond to him. And it goes way beyond Babylon. In fact, there's a phrase in the book of Jeremiah, and this comes out in the New American Standard. In fact, the first time I really went through the book of Jeremiah in a study in a class with Doc Smith, we were using the New American Standard, and here's the way the phrase is translated. Behold, the days are coming. When you read that, if you're in the New American Standard, when you read that phrase, behold, the days are coming. In fact, our teacher wanted us to get this so much that he wrote a song about it. And so sometimes we would start class and we had to sing this song, even those of us who couldn't sing. Behold, behold, the days are coming. And I'm tempted to make somebody sing it. Who knows it? But I'm not going to do that. So, we at the beginning of at the beginning of class, Doc Smith would come in and behold, behold, and we'd have to sing this song because he wanted to drill it in our heads that when you're reading through the book of Jeremiah and you see this phrase, behold, the days are coming, you watch. And almost every time that phrase is used, he's talking about when Jesus comes. And you know what? This passage, Jeremiah chapter 31 and verse 31, you know what the phrase is that starts the prophecy? Behold, the days are coming. So even if you knew nothing else, you're reading through the book of Jeremiah, you come to this passage in chapter 31, and you're like, whoa, he's going to be talking about the Messiah again. Wonder what this is all about, right? So here we go. Here he starts off, behold, the days are coming when I will make a new covenant. What's covenant again? Okay, it's like a contract, an agreement between two parties. He says, I'm going to make a new covenant with the people of Israel, and Judah. Okay, push pause again. Let's go back to Jeremiah. Jeremiah does this several times in the book of Jeremiah. But what's so significant about Jeremiah mentioning Israel and Judah? Think about this. Where was Jeremiah a prophet?
Judah.
He was a prophet to Judah. Why?
Because Israel had already been carried out. It's gone.
Israel is no more. Okay, I want to belabor this point for just a second. The northern kingdom is referred to as Israel, right? Southern kingdom is referred to as Judah. The southern kingdom gets carried away into captivity. Northern kingdom didn't get carried away into captivity. What happened to the northern kingdom?
Syrians.
What did the Assyrians do? Most of them were wiped out. The people who weren't wiped out were dispersed or intermarried. And so there is no Israel. The reason, you can use the term Israel in a sense to mean God's people. And if you use it in that sense, that'd be Judah. That'd be the southern kingdom. But when you use the phrase Israel and Judah, there is no more Israel. And so when Jeremiah uses that phrase, what he is talking about is not, hey, God's going to bring the people back. There were no people to bring back. When he talked about the southern kingdom, kingdom of Judah, they would come back someday. But when he uses this phrase about Israel and Judah, he's talking about all God's people. He's not just talking about the people, the physical Jewish people who were in Babylonian captivity coming back. No, he's talking about, in fact, back in chapter 9. Okay, do you guys have your Bibles open to Jeremiah? Let's do this for just a second, because I want to make sure and get this, because this is such a powerful passage.
Where at?
Jeremiah chapter 9.
Verse what?
Verse 25.
Mm-hmm. Old days.
Verse 25, he says, this is Jeremiah chapter 9, verse 25. It says, behold, the days are coming. That's a clue right there. It's talking about another messianic prophecy. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will punish all who are circumcised only in the flesh. Well, who is circumcised in the flesh? If you were a Jew, you had to be circumcised in the flesh. What's the point he's making when he says, I'm going to punish everybody who's only circumcised in the flesh?
New King James says, I'm going to spot here again.
Circumcised with the uncircumcised.
Yeah.
It says what now?
Circumcised would be
I will punish
uncircumcised.
all who are
circumcised
circumcised with
and
the
yet
uncircumcised.
uncircumcised.
Okay. Well, he's going to make that point in the very next verse because he's going to say all these other nations like Judah and Edom and Ammon and Moab who live in the desert and distant places, for all these nations are really uncircumcised, even though those nations practice circumcision. Okay, what does he mean when he says only circumcised in the flesh?
Of the heart.
Yeah, what does that mean? You're exactly right. It's in Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 6. Back when the law was first established, part of the law, requirements of the law, when a baby boy is 8 days old, you're supposed to circumcise him, right? But what's he talking about when he says circumcised of the heart?
Change of heart. Turn it to God. It's. I think Paul says it several times too, doesn't he? A circumcision of the heart, and I think he did.
Yeah, and the thing that's so interesting to me is this is right from the very start in the book of Deuteronomy, the 30th chapter. This is that very first generation when the law was first given. God said you're supposed to go through these ceremonies. You're supposed to circumcise. But you know what? I never just wanted it to be a physical act. He says, I wanted this to symbolize something. Yeah, I want you to do the physical act, but I wanted it to symbolize something that took place on the inside. Well, what was it supposed to symbolize? It's supposed to symbolize we're different from other people because of our relationship with God. Well, you should really be different from other people. You should really have a relationship with God. And one of the points he's going to make is, and by the way, Isaiah does this as well as Jeremiah. He says, you know what? Even people who are uncircumcised are going to be a part of the circumcision group. Why? Because they're really going to have the relationship with God. I'm so sorry I'm taking so much time with this, but there's so many of these different prophecies that make the same point. So when he says here, behold, the days are coming when I'm going to make this new covenant with the house of Israel and Judah, already if you look at the phrase the way it's used in the book of Jeremiah, he's talking about all God's people in the future, not just Jewish people. And in fact, just the phrase itself makes sense because there is no such thing as Israel when you talk about Israel and Judah at this point. So he's talking about all God's people. This is the covenant this covenant will not be like the one that I made with their ancestors. And the main point of this verse, by the way, the first half of this verse, where he says not like the one, he's emphasizing the fact I'm not just patching the old one. It's beyond repair. So we're talking about a brand new covenant, not a reworking of the old one. Dramatic pause. That automatically means, right, anybody who starts talking about the old covenant and the old rituals being reestablished, that kind of goes against what he just said here, isn't it? He's doing away with that old covenant. I got a text from Daryl's son this Sunday afternoon because he ran into somebody who was quoting to him from Revelation chapter 22 about the bride of Christ, and it has to be the Jewish people because they're from Jerusalem. And some of the discussion was really interesting, but I tell you what, there's some people who are saying that. And I don't want anybody to think I hate Jewish people. I don't want anybody to think that at all. But I am dumbfounded. I'm just blown away with people who think that a physical temple in Jerusalem is going to be rebuilt and there's going to be these sacrifices offered again under the old covenant. He's saying you can't repair that thing, and God's not concerned with that whole relationship. It just goes against all this, and it kind of really goes against why did Jesus die on the cross then? This just blows me away. Anyway, the phrase that he uses here when he talks about making this new, not like the old one, it cannot be repaired. It's one that has to be replaced. He says it's not like that old one when I took them by the hand. When I took them by the hand and led them out of Egypt. By the way, this phrase, to take by the hand, is a phrase that they would typically use in literature to talk about parents guiding children. Right? And it sounds like that. Taking a little kid, help them because they can't see the way to go. Well, that's the way God was with his people. When he led them out of the land of Egypt, he says they did not remain faithful to my covenant. So even though he saved them, which by the way, deliverance from Egypt, number one event in the Old Testament. Most emphasized, number one event in the Old Testament. If nothing else, you get this because the three major feasts, there were 7 feasts, but the 3 major feasts that everybody was required to attend, all the males were required, all focused on that Egyptian captivity in that period of history. According to Deuteronomy chapter 5, Sabbath day observance. Sabbath day observance was taking place on the 7th day, but the purpose of Sabbath day observance was what? To remember that you were slaves in the land of Egypt and God delivered you out of the land of slavery. It was the same thing. Number one event. He says, I took them by the hand and I led them out of there and I started this thing, and guess what? They did not remain faithful to that covenant. They didn't keep the law. So I turned my back on them, says the Lord. Now I am interested again. What is your phrase at the end of verse 9? Mine says, I turned my back on them.
I did not care for them.
Did not care for them.
I disregarded them.
Disregarded them. It's not an easy phrase to translate because it's a very strong phrase. Now get this. If you're using the picture of a parent and a child and leading by the hand, one of the strong words here would be abandonment. It's kind of like, you know what? You're constantly rebellious. You're not. I give up. That's the picture. Roger, what was the one you had?
Pay no heed to them.
Pay no heed?
Yeah.
Okay. To ignore. By the way, that's a good translation too, because the idea of ignoring or abandoning, a very strong expression. And by the way, I hope this makes sense to you, because don't get the picture of, well, what kind of parent would do that? What we're trying to communicate here is God's relationship to his people. Why does he have to abandon us? Because of the nature of God. He cannot coexist with sin. And since they kept rebelling and didn't live up to the system that would have taken care of this, there's nothing else God can do. Sin separates us from God. It's a strong picture, and it's meant to be a strong picture. Verse 10, this is the new covenant that I will make. So he's looking forward to the day of the Messiah, right? Here's the new covenant with the people of Israel on that day, says the Lord. Which, by the way, I automatically take that because Jeremiah is saying it. I'm talking about God's people in the future, not just Jews, right? With God's people in the future. Here it is. Number 1, I'm going to put my laws in their minds, and I'll write them on their hearts. In their minds and on their hearts. This is where I'd write that in that Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 6, or Jeremiah chapter 9, verse 25. The idea is God always wanted his people not just to go through the motions, not just be circumcised, but be circumcised in the heart. He wants us to really be that kind of, and he says, you know what, in the future, that's the only kind of people I'm going to accept. People who really, not just go through the motions, but are really committed to me. Write the laws in their minds and on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. That's point number 2. It's the close relationship. In other words, there won't be any abandonment. We will have this union together, right? Verse 11 is point number 3. They will not need to teach their neighbors, nor will they need to teach their relatives, saying, you should know the Lord. For every one of them, from the least to the greatest, will already know me. Okay, I want to take just a minute. This is an extremely important point to understand. He's saying nobody has to be taught because they're already going to know me. Under the old covenant, how did you identify yourself? How were you included in God's people in the old covenant? Who was included in the old covenant relationship?
You're born into it.
Okay, everybody who was a Jew,
Or
you were born into it. It was associated with your race, right? And it was possible for somebody else to become a Jew. That's true. But if you were born into a Jewish family and you had the sign of circumcision on the 8th day, you were considered part of God's people. But guess what? A 6-month-old, a 1-year-old, he doesn't know anything about God. So what has to happen? You grow up in a Jewish family. You have to learn, hey, this is who you are. And that has to be taught, right? He's saying, listen, this new covenant's not going to be that way. Well, what's one of the strong implications here? You're not born into this. It's not just because you're related to somebody. It's not just because you're part of a certain race. Why? Because you cannot be part of this until you're already under. Nobody's going to tell you to know the Lord because you know what? You can't be part of this until you know the Lord. That's why I like the verses when it talks about baptism. It talks about things like 1 Peter 3:21. It says it's not just removal of dirt from the flesh. It's not just getting wet. It's not the acting of the act. It's the pledge of a good conscience towards God, it says. Well, it has to be the pledge of a good conscience towards God. Because if it's not, it's just the acting of an act, getting wet, doesn't mean somebody really knows the Lord, doesn't mean they're really making commitment. So it's not really a baptism. You're not part of the people of God. Colossians chapter 2, verse 12, again talking about our baptism, says, our baptism is our faith in the power of God who raised Jesus from the dead. So we already have a trusting belief in God who can save us. You have to have that understanding before you can become a Christian. Before baptism's really baptism. Okay. That's the main point that this is saying. This verse is not saying that you don't need any teachers anymore. How do we know that? Well,
Paul said there were some will be teachers.
Mainly because under the new covenant relationship, there are many places where it says that we are supposed to, like 2 Timothy, the 2nd chapter, the 2nd verse, we're supposed to pass this on to other reliable people so they can pass it on. We're told to study so that we might be able to teach. Paul tells Timothy time and time again, we're supposed to teach. The point of this verse is, though, nobody can be part of this new covenant without already understanding what they're doing. You have to understand first because it's a matter of a person's faith. Okay, and then the fourth point of this. So the first point, back up in verse 10, is the idea if it's not just a physical thing, it's on the minds and the heart. The second point in verse 10 is the close relationship with God. The third point in verse 11 is you have to understand this before you're part of the covenant relationship. You're not born into it. And then the last point here in verse 12 is, I will forgive their wickedness and I will never again remember their sins. It's forgiveness of sins. Well, that's the only way you can have that close relationship with God, if you take away the thing that separates us from God. So the sins are forgiven. We have a relationship with God. Verse 13, when God speaks of a new covenant, it means that he has made the first one obsolete. It's now out of date and will soon disappear. Okay, now out of date, soon to disappear. This is another hint that this was probably written before 70 AD, because what happens in 70 AD? Temple is finally destroyed. Which, by the way, from the day that Jesus died on the cross, it was all obsolete. It was never totally effective. It always looked forward to Jesus' death on the cross. So, by the way, the term of the new covenant, 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 25, refers to what Jesus did for us on the cross as the new covenant. In fact, remember 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 23 and following, that's the famous passage that talks about the Lord's Supper. I received from the Lord that which I also delivered unto you. The night that Jesus was betrayed, he took the bread. Remember that passage? And what does Jesus say? He says, this is the blood of the new... You know, sometimes I think it would help us if we used a different word. This is the blood of the new agreement. This is the blood of the new contract. New relationship we've got with God. He says, by the way, this is my blood. That's what gives us this new relationship. Okay, there are 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 6, Matthew chapter 26, verses 26 through 28. They all talk about this new covenant we have in Jesus' blood, the very one he's talking about here. Okay, chapter 9, which this is where I really kind of thought we were going to start. So, all right.
You got 15 minutes, no problem.
Yeah, okay, here we go. Again, I just want to point this out to you because I think this is so interesting. Verse 9, it starts off and it says, here's what my translation says. It says, the first covenant between God and Israel had its regulations for worship and a place of worship here on earth. Right? That first phrase, the first covenant between God and Israel. The word covenant, by the way, is not in the Greek. You know what it just says in the Greek language? It says the first. It's an adjective that stands by itself. So we're supposed to already understand what he's talking about. I think it's a good translation. I think he is talking about this covenant relationship, because the whole idea is, I mean, he's already talked about the priesthood and he's talked about the law, and those are two examples of what's happening under this old relationship. Now he's going to shift from talking about the priesthood and the law and the role of the high priest. He's going to shift to the tabernacle itself. Then he's going to come back to the role of the high priest again. But it's kind of like he's just dealing with a bunch of different key aspects of the way we had a relationship with God under the old covenant to the way we have a relationship with God under the new covenant. So this section, he's really going to spend, wow, I can't hardly even see that, and I'm standing right next to it. Can you see that? Okay, I'm just going to tell you what it is. If you were to get in your mind the picture of the tabernacle in the Old Testament, it would really help this section. In fact, since we've only got a few minutes, we'll be starting here next week. If you could give you a homework assignment, look at the Old Testament tabernacle. It's interesting, he's not going to use the temple. The temple and tabernacle are very closely related, but he's going to base his analogies here on what you've got with the tabernacle. You've got, they would set up the tabernacle means what? What does the name tabernacle mean? Tent. It just means tent, which is so interesting. The tent of meeting, 150 feet by 75 feet, you'd set up the perimeter. Inside, there would be the tent, and the tent would be, literally, by the way, just so you know this, in the Greek, it doesn't say rooms. Most translations say there's a first room and a second room. No, it just says the tent and then the tent and then the tent. Okay? And we take it to mean rooms because inside the area set aside, this 150 by 75 feet, you have the tabernacle proper. The first room of the tabernacle we refer to as the holy place, right? And that would be 15 by 30 feet. And then the Holy of Holies would be 15 by 15. So it'd be 45 feet by 15 feet, right? The reason the Holy of Holies was 15 by 15, it was considered later on in the temple, it'd be 15 by 15 by 15 because the cube was considered the perfect shape, represented that which was perfect. Anyway, when you come into the holy place, before you came into the holy place, so here's the what is this out here? There are two things out here before you get into the holy place. What are the two things out there?
Table and lamp.
I've got those backwards, don't I? What are they? No, not inside the holy place. This is the Holy of Holies. Well, let's do it that way. Let's work our way out. What's the only thing inside the Holy of Holies?
Always has the ark.
We've got the Ark of the Covenant, which, by the way, what do you call the lid on the top of the Ark of the Covenant?
Mercy.
Heads up.
Whoa! Nice catch.
Yeah, it's referred to as the mercy seat. He's going to use an interesting phrase in the 9th chapter to help us better understand. It's referred to as the mercy seat, or he's going to use another phrase that comes from the word propitiation. What does the word propitiation mean?
Calming of the wrath.
Yeah, to take away the wrath. That's exactly right. So we'll come to that in just a minute. What's on top of the? So it's referred to as the mercy seat on the Ark of the Covenant. And there's two angel cherubim with their wings spread out over the top. Okay, there's the veil here. In front of the veil, what's right in front of the veil? We're working our way out. What's this right in front of the veil? Altar of incense. This is really interesting. If you're reading this ahead of time, the altar of incense, the Old Testament tells us it was in the holy place. If you were reading through Hebrews chapter 9, you might get the idea that it's not. You might get the idea that it's in the Holy of Holies. Well, it's interesting because sometimes our translators goof us up. It doesn't use the preposition in. Even though a translation might say that, it doesn't say that. The Greek says the Holy of Holies had the altar of incense. It doesn't say it was in there. Why is that significant? Because it wasn't in there. But it had the altar of incense. Why? Because the altar of incense was tied to what took place in the Holy of Holies. So we'll talk about each one of these. Ark of the Covenant, that's the altar of incense. What's on the right-hand side? What's on the right-hand side in the holy place?
Consecrated bread.
Yeah, table of showbread, consecrated bread, 12 loaves put out there, each one loaf for each of the tribes. What's on the other side?
Golden lamps.
Wash basin.
Oh,
Okay, the laver, the wash basin would be out front. Okay, and that's where the priest had to wash, and also the brazen altar for sacrifices. But on the left-hand side would be the lampstand, which anytime it says candle stand, you know that's not right because candles weren't even invented back then. So it's the lampstand. They had to trim the lamps, and there'd be 7 of them on the seven of them on the branches that came out from the top. And so the priest would come in and it would trim the lamps, so it'd be light there. Once a week they'd put out the bread that had to be there, and they would also take care of the incense on the altar of incense, which represented prayer. The Hebrew author is going to go over this real quickly, and he's going to make the point that all these things are significant, but he's also going to say, you know what, I don't have time. They're all significant, they all mean something, but I want to get to the main point. Well, we're going to slow down and get at least a little bit of the significance here, because this is what he's going to base it on, because this was all laid out by God, because it's supposed to teach us something about God himself, right? So here we are. What verse? Okay, verse 2. Yeah, the first one's been set aside. Those regulations for worship. Here on earth, verse 2. There were 2 rooms. Literally, it says there were 2 tents. And the idea is sections within the tent, right? If your translation says room, that's fine.
It's a sanctuary.
Sanctuary. That's probably not a real good translation there. But the idea is it's a special tent. So I understand why they're using the term sanctuary for the presence of God. Okay. In the first, I'm just going to read from my translation here. 2 rooms in the tabernacle. In the first room, there was the lampstand with the 7 lamps on it. That'd be on the left side. The table, that'd be on the right side with the 12 loaves of bread, with the sacred loaves of bread on the table. In this room was called the holy place, which, by the way, just real quick, the altar of incense represents what?
said prayers.
Prayer. And by the way, even the book of Revelation tells us it represents the prayers of God's saints, right? Arising to the throne in heaven. The table of showbread, what was the significance of that? Why put the bread out? What did that symbolize? What was that to teach Israel? The significance of the table of showbread was God providing their needs. The significance or the symbolism associated with the lampstand was God's people were, this is not just something Jesus said in the New Testament. God's people were supposed to be a light. And Jesus very definitely emphasized that idea. But they were supposed to be, represent all that is associated with light.
Mark, doesn't the light also symbolize the truth?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. It sure does. Verse 3, and then there was a curtain, and behind, every time I read this word curtain or veil, I always remind myself that this thing was a span, and a span would be the width of a man's hand. And there were several layers to this thing, extremely thick. So when you think of veil or curtain, sometimes, I don't know, when I think of a veil, I think of something just so, so flimsy or whatever, and that's not at all. There's this heavy separation between these rooms. Behind the curtain was a second room called the most holy place. In that room were, okay, and you see, the preposition in is not in the original language. Does yours say in that room?
In which?
Okay, what does yours say? With?
In which?
In which?
In which?
Okay. It literally doesn't say in, it says the room had, which is a significant difference because it's not literally in that room. Some people, I think even George Fall thinks this, some people think that they actually moved it. Isn't that what George thinks? Some people think that because the Old Testament makes it really clear that this is where it was. So some people think on the Day of Atonement they actually moved it. And part of the reasoning there would be to fill the whole room with smoke. Well, the veil's going to be moved anyway, and smoke's going to be allowed in. But the Hebrew author, all the Hebrew author is saying here is it's associated with, it's tied to what took place in this special room, the Holy of Holies. In that room were the gold incense altar and the wooden chest, which was covered with gold, by the way, called the Ark of the Covenant, which, and it says that, which was covered with gold on all its sides. Inside the ark were the gold jar containing manna, Aaron's staff that sprouted leaves, and stone tablets of the covenant. Why were these three things in there? What's the significance of the manna?
Is God taking care of them in the wilderness?
God providing for the people when they didn't have anything else, provided them in the midst of the wilderness when there was nothing. What's Aaron's staff? What's the significance of that?
That was related to getting them out of Egypt, right?
Well, okay. Aaron's staff, though, remember Aaron and the others had to put their staffs out there. Why? Because they were complaining, why does Aaron get be the high priest? Why can't we serve as high priest? And so they asked for a sign, so they each put their staff out there, and in the morning it bloomed and budded and had almonds on it. So it was like, whoa. And so God was showing, you can't just do it your way. You can't do it what you want. You have to do it God's way. And God selected Aaron's family to be the high priest. Above the ark were the cherubim. Cherubim is plural for cherub, right? So more than one, and it's a kind of angel. Excuse me?
What exactly is a cherub?
Okay, it's a classification of angel. That's all I really know, to be honest with you. There's a lot written about angels, a lot. And it really concerns me because the Bible does not say a whole lot. In Isaiah, the 6th chapter, we know that there are seraphs, that are above and behind God shouting, holy, holy, holy. Remember that in Isaiah chapter 6? And they are there with 6 wings each, and they're there to serve God. In fact, even in the 6th chapter, they're given a mission to take the coal and put it on Isaiah's lips. You can remember that whole story. We know that cherubim are mentioned because in the Garden of Eden, there was a cherub that was supposed to guard the entrance. We also know that, and this one gets a little controversial, but when talking about the king of Tyre, which is probably a type of what happened to Satan, it refers to him as a cherub of high office. And then he fell. Well, it's using a picture to talk about the arrogance of the king of Tyre, but a lot of people think that's based on a cherub by the name of, which, by the way, what's the name it uses when it talks about the king of Tyre? Lucifer. So a lot of people think that that's a reference to Satan. Satan is an angel. What kind of an angel? Well, if you accept that translation of that passage in Ezekiel, you'd say he was a cherub. So there are archangels, seraphim, cherubim, and angels. And those are the only ones that I'm familiar with. Oh, the Bible also makes reference to... Okay. I don't think that's an angel. Okay. But the Bible also makes reference to guardian angels. Who are in the... Yeah, Jesus actually talks about that. Who are in the presence of God. So it doesn't talk about guardian angels who hover around people. It talks about guardian angels who are in the presence of God. So, as off the top of my head, those are the only designations for angels that are mentioned in the Bible.
Does each person have one guardian?
Oh, didn't say that. See, that's where some of these writings get into what Jesus said. I think it's Matthew 10. Is it Matthew 10? I'm drawing a blank. If anybody remembers this, help me out. Okay, I can look this up later. But Jesus is specifically talking about children, and he talks about their angels, plural, who are in God's presence. Okay, based on that one verse and that one comment, people have developed this whole idea about guardian angels, right? But that's the only comment that Jesus makes about these guardian angels. There's multiple angels who are given jobs. Now, there are other passages that talk about angels doing things, such as Daniel, the 10th chapter. Daniel chapter 10, Daniel mentions Gabriel as an angel. Also talks about Michael the archangel, and it says there are princes or angelic beings who are evil, who are standing behind some of the world forces and getting in the way of God's angels doing their missions. And it's kind of like, whoa, why didn't you write another chapter about this? Well, God didn't want to. All he said was, Daniel, your prayer was answered 21 days ago, and the messenger was sent, but one of these princes got in the way, and these angelic beings, one of the bad guys, was fighting with them until Michael got there, helped him out. And do you remember this? Daniel, the 10th chapter? So, I'm sorry, you got me started on everything I know about angels in the Bible.
So you didn't, do we each have a guardian angel, or is that?
The Bible doesn't say that.
Doesn't say that?
No. Now, the Hebrew author says, in the first chapter, when he says people get so hung up on angels, he said, you know what angels are here for? Angels are here to serve God's people. Doesn't talk about guardian angels, but Hebrews chapter 1 says they are servants. In fact, what's the phrase it uses? It's a good time to review this. We're out of time.
That through prayer.
Excuse me?
They help answer prayer.
Or whatever God wants. They're servants to be used. Here, I don't even have the book of Hebrews opened here. What is Hebrews? Isn't it the end of chapter 1?
Sent to serve those who will inherit salvation. 114.
114, thank you. Are not angels ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation? Christians, people are going to heaven. They're here to help. The Hebrew author is going to mention this again at the end of the book. He says sometimes we encounter angels unaware. What does that mean? It means sometimes God has his angels doing stuff and we don't know it. And that's another one where after you read it, you go, woo.
Yeah.
But I can't read it more into it than what it says there. Okay, I'm sorry, I kind of helter-skelter tonight. What verse did we leave off on?
I think we are verse 5.
Okay, I'll make a mark here. We'll review real quickly these first few verses. And next week, I'm going to draw this again so we can get a better picture of what's going on with the tabernacle, because he's going to use that to teach us a lot about what Jesus really did based on the old, especially on the Day of Atonement that happened in the Old Testament. Any other comments or questions on that? Let's pray.